Hello and welcome everybody. Can everybody hear me okay at the back? Okay. Well, thank you for joining us for this session on improving estate management. It's great to see so many people here that are interested in improving estate management, because I do think it is an area where there's certainly room for improvement. What I'm going to do before we get into the presentation properly is just run through some of the aims and objectives of this session. So after a brief introduction, the main focus of the session is going to be two main focuses. First of all, on strategic estate management, and then secondly on some of the legal responsibilities that we have as schools. So under strategic estate management, we're going to see how a strategic approach will help support the school's education, vision and goals and aims. We're going to concentrate as well on one of the core aspects of a strategic approach, which is the school's asset management plan. And I'm going to focus just on three core areas or fundamentals of a good asset management plan. We're going to then see how an estate's development plan might fit in with an overall strategy for a school, and then we're going to see how we can possibly prioritise and plan some of those works. And then we're going to have a look at some of our legal responsibilities, focusing on some statutory compliance areas. So the purpose of this session is we're going to be making reference to some recent guidance that was published by the DFE on good estate management for schools. I'm not going to be reviewing it in any detail, but what we're going to be focusing on is some of the skills and some of the knowledge that's required for good estate management, and then hopefully going to give you some practical suggestions and advice on how you might implement some of that guidance within your setting. So, by way of a brief introduction, my name's Peter Maloney. I'm a director at Lancaster Maloney, and we're a firm of property and construction consultants, and that's just really a posh way of saying that we're surveyors, we're architects, we've got some mechanical, electrical engineers, but we specialise within the education sector. So we advise individual schools or multi-academy trusts, we advise dioceses and some local authorities on estate strategy. So we provide quite a specialised educational asset management plan service and advice within the sector. It's an area that I've spent most of my professional career working in. I've also been a governor at a number of schools, and I'm currently the chair of governors at a high school in Stockport. Now, just part of the introduction, I just wanted to give you a little bit of the historical context of what we're going to be talking about, because traditionally this was an area that local authorities provided to schools. They advised schools strategically in terms of their estate. Now the landscape's changed over recent years, and with academies, with them perceived more autonomy, some have pulled away from the local authority. Local authorities have cut back services due to austerity measures. So some of them services that were traditionally or historically provided by the local authority are no longer there. So hence this new guidance that's been issued by the DFE, which is there to help and support schools in providing strategic approach to estate management. So that guidance is there for anybody that's involved in estate management. So we might have some head teachers here today, we might have some bursars or estate managers or governors. Well, that guidance is applicable to all of the above. So first of all, looking at a strategic estate management, how can being strategic support the education visions and aims of your school? Well, as a governor, I've been involved with the school development plan process or the school improvement plan, and that's something that all schools are required to do. They're required to set out a plan to improve the quality of teaching and learning. So how does that fit in with a strategic approach to estate management? Well, this is an excerpt from the guidance. So the school's education vision would feed into the estate vision, which would then feed into the estate strategy. So, for example, your estate vision might be to increase places due to a rising demand locally. That might be part of your estate vision. Well, the estate strategy then would look at how would you provide those additional places or that additional space. Or it might be that you want to, as a school, to develop a specialism like science or sports. Well, then your estate strategy would look at how you would actually provide those facilities. That would then feed into your asset management plan. And then your asset management plan, maybe part of your overall plan, might be an estates development plan. But certainly all that would be periodically reviewed at a strategic level. So the reason I've showed this slide is because really to show the importance and the context of getting your estate strategy right in order to support the education goals and objectives within your school. So looking at then the asset management plan. This is a big component of your strategic approach to estate management. So what is an asset management plan? Well, when I ask schools if they've got an asset management plan, many might just hand me a condition survey, which is great, and that forms part of the asset management plan, but it's only a small part of the asset management plan. The asset management plan brings together all premises related information and data. And what does that look like for a school? Well, that would really depend on your setting. So for a small school, it might be a single document or a file, or for a multi-academy trust or a diocese with many schools, that might be a more complex arrangement. We've not got time to talk about everything that goes into an asset management plan. But what I do want to do is concentrate on the three core areas or the fundamentals of any asset management plan. And that centres around condition, sufficiency and suitability. So if you've not yet got an asset management plan, where would you start? Well, everything needs to start with a plan. Quite literally a plan. So one of the first things that you might need to do is get up-to-date plans of your premises. So one of the first things that you might need to do is commission maybe a measured survey and get those plans up to date. And the importance of up-to-date plans is because they feed into every single aspect of the asset management plan, certainly the condition, certainly suitability, certainly the sufficiency section. On this plan, this is a coloured plan, so this is highlighting different areas, teaching and learning, non-teaching. What would be good to show on the plan are room designations, obviously, but also areas. And we'll see as we go through the presentation how important it is to have up-to-date plans. So, looking at the condition then, understanding the condition of the estate will help you to identify what works are required, the cost of that work, and it will start to help you to prioritise those works. Now, it might seem quite an obvious thing to say that you need a condition survey, but I'm surprised how many schools don't have an up-to-date condition survey. They're not aware of significant looming condition issues that could potentially shut the school or parts of the school. I'll give you an example. In recent weeks, we've been speaking to a new school, an academy, who've asked us to put together a SIF bid to secure funding for a roof. So they knew they had conditions with the roof, but as part of our discussions, I asked about the wider condition issues. They didn't have a condition report. So I suggested that why don't we do a little bit of due diligence and just have a look at some of the key components. So we got some mechanical and electrical engineers in to have a look, and lo and behold, I mean this is a high school, but even so, they've got £1.5 million worth of mechanical work that needs to be done, and a similar amount on the electrical side. That just wasn't on their radar at all. Just wasn't on their radar. They had no idea that they had this significant condition issue looming there in the background. So let's have a look at our condition survey. What should it cover? Well, ideally it should cover a 5-year planning period, and ideally, if you've got the expertise and the data in the right format, you could possibly update that annually. But if you take nothing else from this session, one of the key things is to remember is to get your brief right with your condition survey. There's some help and advice within the DFE guidance on how to procure a condition survey and how to appoint professionals. But another example, a school in Grantham that we were working with in recent years, they'd spent £5,000 on a condition survey, which is obviously a lot of money. But in terms of an asset management plan condition survey, that is probably about right for the size of their school. But unfortunately, they didn't get the brief right, and the format of the condition survey and the information that was provided wasn't conducive to the school being able to plan strategically. It was pretty much a waste of money for the school. So have a look at the guidance, get your brief right. What do the DFE say? Well, the DFE say that the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors can help you find a qualified surveyor. Okay. I'd probably go a little bit further and say that you want a surveyor that's got knowledge and expertise within the sector. Certainly a surveyor that knows the DFE condition criteria and knows what you need from an asset management plan condition survey. So what might a condition survey look like? Well, I've just shown an excerpt here from a condition survey. So what we would do, we would look at all the main elements within the building. The DFE have identified 12 main elements, but there are lots and lots of sub-elements. And for each of those elements, we would put a condition grade and a priority grade. So using the DFE criteria, condition grade A is good, D is life expired, priority 4 is outside the 5-year planning cycle, a priority 1 would be requiring attention within the first year. You can also, if you get your brief right, use other priorities and codes in there to help you prioritise. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. But what you can also do is put an estimated life on each of your key main elements, and that'll act as an important inventory of key components and their expected life expectancy. So you're not caught short, and so you can plan well ahead for the replacement of these key components. So as part of the condition survey, you want to see a 5-year costed profile, and that can be presented in any way. On the slide there, we've got it by element, but you can do it by priority or condition. But this gives you an idea of the likely spend over the next 5 years. And all this school needs, this small primary school, is nearly £1.7 million over the next 5 years. So once you've got over the shock of that, how do you then plan and prioritise those works? Well, again, we'll come on to that slightly later in the presentation. Now, the second key area of a good asset management plan centres around sufficiency. So essentially what we're looking at is, have we got enough space? Or indeed, have we potentially got too much space? Well, a sufficiency assessment will help you to understand whether you've got enough of the capacity that you've got in the school or whether you've got too much. So if the assessment shows that you haven't got enough space, then what can you do about that? Well, potentially there are two options. One is to extend, but another option might be to reconfigure. Now, time and time again, we get phone calls off schools saying we need an extension for this or an extension for that. And we say, fine, great, we'll be more than happy to have a look at that. But why don't we just take a step back and have a look at the estate as a whole and see what your gross floor area looks like? Because many times what we find is schools overall might have enough area, it's just not configured particularly well. And what we've been able to do time and time again is by some quite modest adaptations and internal alterations is glean that additional area that they need at a fraction of the cost of perhaps putting an extension on. But what do you do if you've got too much area? And you might think, well, so what? Great, we've got loads of area. Well, having too much area can actually be detrimental to the financial viability of your school, because you need to light that space and heat that space and pay rates on that space and repair that space, which might not be necessary. So what can we do there? Well, one thing that we could do is rationalise or consolidate and even dispose of certain buildings within the estate. Or perhaps the preferred solution might be to look at leasing buildings or parts of buildings to third parties, which would be may well be preferable, as that would be income generating for the school. So how do we determine sufficiency then within a school? Well, we do this by having a look at the DFE area guidance. So the DFE published guidance, area guidance for schools, principally building bulletins 103 and 104. And essentially what we would do is compare what you've got at the moment with what you should have or potentially could have. It's slightly different for a high school, because what we might need to do there is have a look at your particular curriculum and look at a curriculum analysis and feed that in. And you may well be familiar with a net capacity assessment, which is a standard assessment that schools undertake anyway. So what do the DFE say about this? Well, apparently this is a complex area and you might not be able to do yourself. You might need some external help and support in determining sufficiency within your estate. So what might that look like? Well, here we've got a sufficiency assessment on a primary school. Now, obviously you can't read that, but on the left-hand side there, we've scheduled out all the accommodation within the school, all the teaching and the non-teaching accommodation. And then what we would do, we would compare that with the building bulletin relevant to your school. So we'd essentially model your existing area and accommodation against DFE suggested or recommended areas. And that would give us either surplus or shortfall. Now, that might give us a surplus or shortfall overall, or it might give us a surplus and shortfall in specific areas. So, for example, on this particular assessment, this identified that the school had a significant shortfall on circulation. You might think, well, so what? Well, in this particular school, that was impacting on teaching and learning because much of the circulation was actually through teaching spaces, which was disrupting teaching and learning. As part of this same assessment, we identified that they had overall some surplus area within the school. One of them we found to be the kitchen, which was just enormous. It was probably around about a classroom size bigger than what it needed to be. So as part of a school development plan, we identified area within the school that we could glean for other reasons and other purposes. And on this particular school, that's exactly what we did. We used, ultimately, within a development plan, some of the school's kitchen area to divert circulation, which helped to improve an area of teaching and learning. So the third area that feeds into, or a key component of an asset management plan, is suitability. So your building, for example, might be in perfect condition, it might be of adequate size, but is it suitable? Well, a suitability assessment will see whether or not your building is fit for purpose, and the plans that you might need to put in place to improve it. It assesses how well the building fits your needs. So, for example, as part of your education vision, if you're a primary school, you might want to form a foundation unit, but your nursery class might be at the other end of the school from your reception class. Or it might be that your main entrance is fundamentally in the wrong place, which is impacting safeguarding perhaps. Or it might be that the classrooms are the right size and in good condition, but they're just not the right shape. Some schools that we visited, particularly in Merseyside, have L-shaped classrooms with blind spots, which just aren't conducive to teaching and learning. So all this would feed into a suitability assessment. Now, there isn't any prescribed format to undertake a suitability assessment, but you might use a form, something similar to this. So here we would assess the suitability of all areas within the school, including teaching and non-teaching areas. We'd consider a number of factors within each of those areas that potentially could have a direct impact on teaching and learning, like, for example, the size and shape or location of spaces, any environmental conditions that could impact teaching and learning, fixtures, fittings and equipment and ICT. So they all get brought into the suitability assessment. We would also look at safeguarding and security and things like access. And we can use a simple scoring matrix that can identify issues within your estate, which would then feed into your overall estate strategy and potentially an estate development plan. Now, just back to the chart from the DFE guidance, because there they talk about an estate development plan being an option. Now, everything's an option, isn't it? But going back 25 years ago, when we were predominantly working within the voluntary aided sector, all the diocesan schools, the diocese wanted schools to have development plans 25 years ago. And I think it's a really good idea, because an estate development plan draws up together and coordinates all the work within your asset management plan into a single programme. So an asset management plan might look at your short to medium term, but a development plan would look at the medium to long term. It would include all your goals and dreams and aspirations. So what's the importance of an estate development plan? Well, it's so that anything that you do within your estate can be seen in the context of an overall development plan. And what that avoids is work being done in the wrong place or in the wrong order, which could potentially waste valuable resources. And time again, we go to schools that have had works done where if they'd just taken a slightly more strategic approach and took a step back and looked at the estate, they perhaps would have never spent money doing those works. So what should an estate development plan include? Well, it might be a written schedule or a programme of works, or it might be a drawing based on an overall master plan. And what do the DFE say about this? Well, again, this is probably another area that you might need some professional help and advice. So what does an estate development plan potentially look like? Well, this is quite a simple one for a primary school that we've been working with for a number of years. So in here we've gone through the process of condition, suitability and sufficiency assessments, and all that has fed into this quite simple estate development plan. So on there we've got things that cover condition, we've got things that cover suitability and sufficiency. So phase one, the highest priority for the school, was to replace a temporary classroom which was dilapidated. The other two, phases 1 and 2, were around suitability. Their reception class and main entrance just weren't suitable, so they paid with their own funding to have that reconfigured. The next three phases, phases 4, 5 and 6, is all centred around condition, and we were able there for the school to secure SIF funding to address those condition issues. And the other phases we get to develop. But the school can see there the context of what they're doing in an overall development plan. Now, it might look slightly different for your school, and it might be that some works need to go ahead that might be undone at a later stage, but at least if you're taking a strategic approach, you can make an informed decision on that. So what are some of the other benefits of a strategic approach and putting together a development plan? Well, you'll be in a strong position to respond to funding initiatives. So for example, a couple of years ago, we had Healthy Pupils Capital Funding, which came from nowhere really. And a few years before that, well, quite a few years before that, there was an initiative, similar initiative, on the back of something that Jamie Oliver did. And £150 million was made available, and it was quite low key. Not a lot of people heard about it. The window to response was ridiculously small. But for all our schools that had development plans in place, we knew exactly, although it probably wasn't the highest priority at that particular time, we could respond to that initiative. And in a number of authorities, our schools did very, very well because we were able to respond quickly to that particular initiative. Another benefit of taking a strategic approach
is that it will enable you to access funding. So for example, if you're an academy and you're thinking perhaps about SIF funding, well, they want to see evidence of your rationale for that particular project. They want to see that you're prioritising the worst condition issue, and they want to see that in the context of the overall needs of the school. So then, how do we start to prioritise these works? So that condition survey that we looked at, which was £1.7 million for a primary school, that didn't include any of the other issues, the suitability and sufficiency issue. How do we start to prioritise those works? Well, one approach is a risk-based prioritisation. So perhaps right at the top of your list would be things that would impact health and safety and safeguarding. Things that where you might have a legal obligation. So that would be right, or should be right at the top of your priority. And then working down that priority, maybe things that are impacting teaching and learning that could potentially have the potential to close an area of the school. And then perhaps works that could impact other operations within the school. And then looking at the likelihood of failure or the consequence of the impact, right the way down to available funding and source, funding sources. Now, just to give you an example of this, last year we took a multi-academy trust through this process as a bit of an emergency, really, because we thought that they were going to be able to bid for SIF, condition improvement funding, and we prepared probably £3 million worth of category D1 condition bids for the trust. And right at the 11th hour, they didn't qualify to bid. They were put on what's called an allocation. So instead of bidding for funding, they were just given an allocation. They were of a certain size. What they ended up with, instead of £3 million, they ended up with about £350,000. So they had probably about 10% of what they needed to address their category D1 condition issues. Well, we went through this process with the trust, and even in areas that were category D1, we were able to further prioritise those areas. So for example, we could have spent all the money on one roof at the school, at one of the schools, but instead we're able to drill down into areas that were higher priority. Some of the decks, for example, were ceramic board, which have a health and safety implication. So we were able to drill down and just keep that trust going for another year by helping them to prioritise. And that's why it's so important that you get your survey brief right, because highlighted there is a category box that you can include as part of your survey brief. So not only are we picking up health and safety, we can categorise elements further by looking at the impact on teaching and learning. Is it a health and safety implication? So just looking at the second area now, that I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about, is that around statutory compliance. Because what you need to understand as a school is what aspects of health and safety legislation apply to your school or schools, and what are the implications and risks of not complying with that particular legislation. There might be between 50 and 100 elements that require regular service and maintenance. Some of them are statutory, some of them are not statutory. I'm not going to go through and list every element that might need maintenance. There's some really good advice in the DFE guidance on testing and frequency. That's within the safety section of the guidance. But just beware that list isn't exhaustive. It's a good list, but there might be things that are applicable or peculiar to your school that aren't included there. Now, what I would say on statutory compliance and being able to manage this within the school is that it isn't rocket science, but it does take a lot of time and resource. So this is something that you could well manage in-house And the school where I'm chair of governors, that's exactly what we do. We manage it in-house. But a question that you need to be asking yourself is, how do you keep abreast of changing legislation? So, for example, in recent years, there have been some changes around asbestos, some changes around Legionella. So, if you're managing this in-house, how do you keep abreast of those changes? Some things that we regularly see that get overlooked are things like blazing risk assessments, for example, which these were a requirement under some legislation, I think the Workplace Regulations 96. So all schools had blazing risk assessments done at that time, and not many have had them or kept up with them since. Another area that we find is where, for example, schools buy in a service level agreement for catering, and they're thinking that provider, whether it's a local authority or some other provider, are servicing and maintaining all the kitchen equipment as part of that. And we found that not to be the case on a number of occasions. Another area that we find quite regularly is where there isn't perhaps a statutory requirement to service and maintain something, where it might just be good practice. So, for example, sadly, in Stockport a number of years ago, a child actually died when a gate or barrier fell on them. So there might be areas that aren't part of a statutory requirement, but are still nevertheless good practice to service and maintain. And what I would say is, if this is something that you are doing in-house, then it might be an area where you want to get a little bit of help and advice, even if that is just to do a bit of a health check. Do a bit of a health check to make sure that everything that you should be servicing and maintaining is being serviced and maintained. So that brings us to the end now. I'm just going to briefly summarise. We've talked about strategic estate management. We've shown how this can help to support and underpin the school's education vision and aims. We've concentrated a lot of our time talking about the asset management plan, and I've spoken about the three core elements of an asset management plan being condition, sufficiency and suitability. We've talked about how an estates development plan might fit in with the overall strategic strategy for the school, and then we've had a look at how we might prioritise some of those works. And then very briefly at the end there, we've touched on some of the legal responsibilities in terms of statutory requirements. So I'm more than happy now to take any questions that anyone might have on strategic estate management or asset management planning or anything else. I can't promise an answer, but I'm happy to take questions. Okay. Well, thanks very much for listening. Lancaster and Maloney are on stand J8. If you're a little bit shy about putting your hand up, then please come over and see us. We'll gladly answer any questions that you might have. But for the rest of it, enjoy your day and enjoy the show. Thanks for listening.